This Choircast podcast is brought to you by A New Way of Seeing, Meaning in Life and the Christian Vision of Nature. I'm Pierce Alexander Marks, the author of A New Way of Seeing. In our times, Christianity has been given a bad name. Fundamentalists and legalists of all denominations have obscured the fundamental moral teachings of the Church. To be a Christian is to be in love with the created world and its creator, to find meaning in every moment of existence. Please take some time to read the book and become reacquainted with the true heart of Christianity. Thanks.
Welcome to the Unbelief Podcast, your journey, actually our journey together beyond inherited beliefs to a spirituality that works for you. I'm your host, Jeremy. I'm a deep skeptic, also a pastor. We can fix that later, right? No? Damn. All right, you have made it to another Smarty Pants episode of the Unbelief Podcast. Today, we are interviewing author Anna Gazmarian, author of Devout, a memoir of doubt about her deep doubt that stems from her own psychological diagnosis and all the ways that she has navigated herself out of the evangelical world into a new place that works for her. I told you, Anna, that when I received this book in the mail to review and do all of the things, I was not prepared for it. I mean, it hit so hard on so many different levels. And I guess in part, I just want to thank you for the book itself because, you know, it's really just absolutely incredible. I also just want to start by asking you, what for you, the story is about growing up in an evangelical world and having a mental health diagnosis and navigating all of that. So, but before we get into that, I'm just curious, what is working for you right now in terms of spiritual beliefs and practices and all of that?
All the things. So I feel like Trump has changed it a little bit.
Right.
But I will begin. I think for me, I got to a point where I really struggle with church because it's like I have this one person standing on stage telling me what to believe. And that is how my life is always occupied. Like it's always been about a man telling me what to believe. And there's a lot of language within church spaces that it's just hard for me. And I remember I called my pastor and I was like, I don't know what to. He's like, just don't come. It's fine. Just, don't force yourself into this space if it's just traumatizing you. And I just feel like just being with people has been the biggest thing that has kind of kept me holding on to a faith in any aspect is just the way that people have loved me and surrounded me, my daughter. And so I feel like for me, it's much more believing in a God that wants us to feel safe and wants us to have peace. And a lot of people would probably call me a heretic, but that's fine. I think I'm at a place of learning to accept the uncertainty, and that is a really hard thing for me to do because my faith has always been based around having answers, and I don't have any answers and I don't have any tools to know how to handle not having answers.
Yeah, no, that's huge. So being with people, right? What else?
Yeah. I think exercise has honestly been a huge thing for me because I feel like I had a lot of dissociation, a lot of trauma around my body because of purity culture. And that has been a form of reclaiming my body and feeling full and taking up space and not feeling like I have to make myself small in places. And I think that's very much how we are designed to occupy the world. And I've never had that. And so that's been a big one for me. I think I said people, but I mean, in general, just my daughter, it's one of the most healing things for me to watch how she occupies the world without any apologies. There's the freaking patriarchy and she's in Target having a fucking meltdown and doesn't care.
Yeah.
And that's just been like a really healing thing for me to witness, and also like a mirror of healing my younger self. Like last night, she said something and she was upset, and then she looked at me. She's like, "I didn't say that kindly. Can I say that kindly?" I'm like, "You're 3 years old.
Wow.
You're the I don't know." And I think this thing with kids is they are so attuned to the world in a way that adults are not. Like we'll be walking and she'll see like a thing of birds or something, and she like brings me to those places that like every like glimpse of beauty, I connect that with spirituality, and she's like constantly just bringing that up for me, and making me like live in these small moments that I otherwise would not notice.
Yeah. Wow. That's just beautiful. I love that. I really feel that sort of sense of grounding in relationships, right? Mm-hmm. The way relating with other people, especially kids, can bring us back to center and back to ourselves. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you grew up, as I did, in the more evangelical world. We've got a lot of people that will watch this live stream and listen to this podcast that are in that same boat. So, I want to rewind, if we started it today, kind of go back to the past and ask, when did it all start to unravel for you?
It's funny because I feel like I've kind of always been unraveling. Like I never fit in the space. Like I remember being on a mission trip when I was in middle school and having all of these questions and being like, am I even a real Christian? Because I'm having all these doubts and no one around me is asking these questions. And like I went to Africa every summer, like I saw this level of poverty and everybody around me was so like, look at the joy they have in suffering. And I was just like, but why does God allow this when he could end it at any time?
Right.
And no one could answer that. And I remember like reading like John Piper, like C.S. Lewis, like trying to understand. And I was scared because there was no space for my questions. And so, I think a struggle even I feel today is like, I don't feel like I fit in Christian spaces. I also don't feel like I fit in like the mainstream. Yes. So I'm kind of just this in between, and I don't want to go fully one way. And so I just am like having an identity crisis of just like, where do I belong?
Yes. Sort of standing and existing just partially in two worlds, right?
Yeah.
No, I totally feel you.
Yeah. And I started, that was like when I was younger, I was really into apologetics, like defending my faith. Debate team, all of the things. But there was always this feeling of there's something wrong with me because I don't fit here. Like when I was in high school, I had all these opinions. I was very loud. The men hated it. And so I was like, I got to write so I can like have a voice, but not like vocalize it. And then when I was in college, my freshman year of college, I was with a guy, like I hadn't heard about consent, all these things. And stuff happened. He went and told the pastor. The pastor told me that I needed to leave because I was a spiritual stumbling block for him, which is like I use the spiritual stumbling block thing for everything. I'm like, you're being a spiritual stumbling block. You're being like, you need to be my spiritual leader. Like I love that shit. I love doing that. It's like reclaiming the language. That's what I have to do.
Maybe we could just have a t-shirt that just says, I'm a spiritual stumbling block. Yeah. Like whenever I wear anything, I'm like, I'm being a spiritual stumbling block right now. Okay. Wow. So then at some point, so tell me about like coming to this moment of like, there's something that I need help with that may be bigger than just like questions, right? You sort of went on this journey of, psychological health. And how did that start? So
after that relationship, I was kicked out of church, and I I spiraled because of like my trauma and thinking that like I was unredeemable. There was something wrong with me. Everything was my fault. I caused a guy to stumble.
You caused a guy to stumble. Oh my God. I'm sorry. I just can't get past it. I can't get past it.
But the thing is like, I still have those tendencies. Like I still, anything revolving to men, I'm like, I'm so sorry. And they're just like, Anna, but that's just my nature. And I hate it. But yeah, so I got, from that, I got diagnosed with bipolar, and that fucked me up in the mind of like, I'm having all these thoughts about killing myself. I grew up in this environment that told me that having those thoughts or urges or acting them out would lead to hell. Right. So like, what does this say about my faith that I'm having all of these thoughts and like urges, and there's got to be something wrong with me.
Do you mind backing up just a second? Because, I think that bipolar disorder is one of the things that people get a little confused by. Do you mind giving us just a little bit like, what is it? And how, a little bit, just a little description.
Yeah. So bipolar 2 has hypomania. So it's like a diet mania, or I don't know how to call it.
So you just said bipolar 2. So there's 2 types. There's bipolar type 1,
bipolar
which is
1 is alternating between mania and depression. So mania is like very grandiose, very inspired, very
I'm going to become the president. I know I can.
Yeah, right. Like Kanye. He has yes. And then hypomania is like a lower. It's less intensive. You're less impulsive. So for me, historically, it would be like staying up all night and writing or painting. It was never life altering, but for a lot of people, it is life altering for people. And there's also a high connection to trauma with it. They now are like, do you have PTSD or do you have bipolar? We don't know.
Right.
But it looks different for everyone. So for some people, they alternate between mania and depression all of the time. For me, historically, it's been depression for years, and then something happens.
So when you received that diagnosis, like, can you walk us through, you were sitting in your therapist's office, and what happened?
So I was the one that got myself to a psychiatrist. No one had told me to go. I just was like desperate. And this woman was the mom of someone that was in my middle school orchestra. So that was awkward. And she just gave me a handout, didn't really give any emotional reaction, and just gave me a list of questions. I answered them honestly. And then she just gave me a handout and pulled out a piece of paper and was like, here are some pills. It was that easy for her, and just didn't understand the emotional impact it had, because at that point I thought God is punishing me by giving me this.
Right.
And that's what I was left with. And I was really wary of going to a psychiatrist, because I thought a lot of psychiatry was based on like being too selfish or sinning. And so at that point, I told her, I was like, I don't want to get into too much of like psychology, because I just think it's really self-centered. Yeah.
So then where did you go from there?
So I started taking medicine. I think for me, it was like, I couldn't rely on God. And so I started relying on these doctors. But then I realized that they were even more unreliable, because, you never know what a medicine is going to work. You never know when it's going to change. So I think I've been on like 35 medications. And it's this trial and error. And people talk about, oh, you just need to go help. It's not that easy, because it takes, even when you get help, it's another situation to actually find something that works for you. And so I I got diagnosed. I ended up moving to Michigan to go to school, and it was there that I started reading Lamentations. And I had been studying poetry, I had been studying writing, and it kind of just clicked for me of thinking about, oh, there is space for all of what I'm feeling. Like, I can be really angry and it's okay. And anger was an emotion I did not know I could occupy. Thought that was sin. Like, I remember sitting in a therapist's office when I was in college and telling him all this stuff. And he's like, why are you not angry? Like, can you scream in my office? I'm like, I can't do that. I can't.
Yeah.
And I cannot raise my voice without getting scared of myself.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I think I started writing obsessively. Like, I thought I was going to be a missionary, and I studied Swahili, like all of these things. And I found writing, and it wasn't a matter of a career. It was a matter of, this is what makes me feel alive. This is what makes me want to wake up in the morning. And that to me is the reason that I'm going to keep doing this. And so I think for me, poetry was a way to reclaim a lot of experiences that I had. And I think the thing I'm so fascinated with lament is like how it follows these poetic forms, and it puts these huge traumas into this like neat box. And that is kind of what I have found, is like poetry condenses like all the mess into this like one object. And I find that to be really beautiful, and it has like reclaimed a lot of things in my life.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was kind of how I found myself back. And once I found Lamentations, I got really into like Jewish mourning practices. Just all I think the thing that was so complicated was people were like, why did you hold on to that? And I was like, I was so fascinated with the life of Jesus. Like, I was so fascinated that he lived so counterculture to the church today. I mean, he wasn't hanging out with sex workers. He wasn't in the church. He was hanging out. The only message mention of he has other people in the church is being like, why are you guys not helping anybody? It's not like, wow, you guys are doing such a good job. It's always like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And all of that is how I want to live my life. And so I've kind of abandoned the ideals of institutions and kind of instead just clung on to who I believe Jesus is. And my atheist friends are like, what if you're wrong? And I'm like, it's fine, because this is like how I want to live my life. And I think it's a place of freedom. It's not of oppression. And that's how I want to live.
Yeah. So when you went into your sort of went to your parents in your church, what was that like?
About my diagnosis?
Yeah.
So my parents are lovely people, and I think they had never dealt with that. And I think there's got to be something really traumatizing as a parent to have this child basically transform before your eyes, and you don't understand why or how. And that's very much what they witnessed, was this like very joyful girl that had never shown any signs of depression. Like it was full on, and they didn't, I think there was almost grief for them of like, where is my daughter? Like, this is not my daughter. So I think they were scared. They paid every medical bill. Like, they talked to my therapist. I think they were learning alongside of me. And I very much recognize that. The church, not so great. I went to my youth leader, who I knew had a mentally ill mother-in-law. So I went to him, and he was basically just making jokes about how crazy she was.
Wow.
And there was a pastor in our church that had bipolar, and I had been waiting for him to preach, because I was like, once he preaches, like, everything is going to make sense.
Yeah.
So he gave his testimony, and it was basically just an apology to his family for his diagnosis, for addiction, all of this. That it was all framed in an apology, and that he needed their forgiveness. None of it was about what it meant to live a life of faith, to engage in these things. Everything was just grounded in scripture. And I don't think any of that is designed to orchestrate mental health treatment.
Right.
But that was very much the lens that he took. And I think the diagnosis made it very, very clear that this is not somewhere I belong. And I'd felt that before, but even more then, it was like, I don't feel welcome here, and I don't know who is going to look at me and hear my experiences and thinking that I'm doing something wrong or that I'm sinning. And I can't live in that space of constantly worrying, like, does this person think I should be doing more? Like, I remember a girl in college, I was sitting with her and talking, and she's like, well, have you been reading your Bible more? And that's like the worst rejection. It's like confirming all the thoughts you have in your head.
And so, yeah. And you are in college, right?
Yeah.
In the midst of all of this.
Yeah.
And so you've got, like, I'm so happy that your parents were great, right? Like, I mean, nobody's perfect, but they did not sort of just do the same thing as your church did. One of the things that I thought was interesting in your book, by the way, this is the book Devout by Anna Gazmarian, and we're getting to talk to her a little bit today. You were talking about like medication, right? And you had this moment in the book where, well, actually, before that, you talked about, because I'd like to talk about this bigger issue that you bring up. So you said, throughout my involvement in church, pastors served as middlemen between God and their congregations. You said, I believed their position of power gave them authority over me, and I respected and trusted each one of them. You're talking about this interaction with Seth, mm-hmm. right? And that's problematic, right?
Yeah.
Can you say a little bit about, for you, like, what are the problems with that sort of overall value system that is sort of programmed into evangelicalism, and how did you experience the sort of consequences of that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of layers to it. I think for me, it was like, I didn't know how to handle the mystery of God. And so putting it onto one person to kind of tell me God's will was kind of like a way for me to just like live my life and not have to just like wander around not knowing things. Uh-huh. So I think that was kind of taken advantage of, though. Mm-hmm. I think one of the things in specifically non-denominational churches is that there's no oversight.
Right.
So mm-hmm. people are constantly getting more and more power, and no one is challenging it. And I think that was very much taken advantage of, and people having that power and lacking humility, and it's almost like the person gets built up as a celebrity. Like, I look at the Trump situation and it makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Like, it makes sense that we are building up a leader that is narcissist and viewing him as a man of God.
Right.
Like, the whole situation with Mark Driscoll, it's the same thing. It's this whole mm-hmm. same thing.
Right.
And like in my case, it led me to be in an even darker place. But the idea that scripture can only be interpreted one way can cost people's lives. I saw many like teenage moms get kicked out of church. One of them in my middle school died by suicide because the church kicked her out.
Yeah.
So it's really a matter of life and death in a lot of situations. And also the patriarchy.
Right. No, for sure.
Yeah. And it's funny because Christians are always like, we're countercultural, but it's functioning in the same way in terms of the patriarchy. I don't think it's designed to, but I think that's what evangelical spaces have made it into.
Right.
So it's really about striving to get a man's approval. And then that carries you through, well, then you strive to get a husband's approval. And it's always about striving to get a man to say you're doing a good job.
Yeah.
And underneath that is wanting to hear God tell you that you're doing a good job.
Right. Which part of the problem too is this sort of tying the masculine identity to God. Right.
Oh yeah.
Right. Yeah. Because if God is a man, then God is in charge, then it makes even more sense. It feels even more of the same piece, right?
Yeah. And I think for me, it created a really unhealthy dynamic where I only wanted love if I had to work for it.
Right.
Because that was very much how I felt about God, was if I have to be working for it. If I'm not working for it, I didn't know how to trust it. And so emotional, unavailable people was very good at having them in my life because I liked the chase. I liked constantly striving for more. And that still very much impacts my life, is I'm constantly striving to do more because that's how I viewed God.
So when was it that you decided, okay, this is it. I'm stepping out. I'm going to leave sort of officially. I'm going to stop going to church.
I think it was in college. I remember going to a mega church when I was in college, walking in, people were like talking to me and were just so superficial. And I just turned around and got out of there. And I didn't look back for several years.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you did, what happened? How did people react to that?
Oh, people were really worried about me.
Yeah.
And I was worried about myself. I was like, there's got to be something wrong with me to not be able to go in those spaces, because I'm seeing all these people that grew up the same way and they're able to be in those spaces. So why can't I?
Right.
And, like the guy that I was with really wanted to be in church. And I think regardless of what you like, I think men can never fully understand the impact that women feel from the abuse from purity culture and just how ingrained that is in your body. And so he would always be like, we're going to church, we're going to church, we're going to church. And I just thought I just gotta stick it out.
Yeah. And yet every time you were there, it was triggering, right?
Yeah. And I did find a church that they were studying Lamentations, very involved in Duke theology. But it all of that kind of came back. I got separated, and it was kind of like, well, what did you do? Like, how can you do more? What can you do to fix this? Mm-hmm. And a pastor taking on the therapist role when that's not what they're designed to do. Right. And it kind of set me back to where I was with my illness of it's a type of suffering that a lot of religious leaders don't know what to do with.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that you just sort of on the side there said something that is important, this idea that like pastors are not therapists. They have no business doing that. And, I think especially for people who have gone through this work, one of the things that, one of the realizations that is really helpful is to say, oh, wait. That pastor was not like he told me these things, but he was in no way qualified to say those things, to try to help me through depression or any of that. Like that is not the role or the training of a pastor. And in fact, when pastors do that, it's like it's often deeply harmful, right?
Yeah. Well, and then there's the whole other issue that like there's churches that are like, oh, we have a therapist on staff.
Yeah.
But then it's someone that is trained just as using the Bible as an answer to everything that is going on in your life.
Yeah.
And then people think, oh, this is just what therapy is, and it's not.
Right.
So people are kind of tricked into thinking they're getting help.
Yeah. So, the term that a lot of people use for a lot of this process is deconstruction, right? And the idea of like this like letting go of a lot of beliefs and trying to reevaluate things, right? And I'm curious, of the sort of beliefs that you grew up with, are there any that still feel like worth putting time in, worth sort of like being part of your identity?
I think, I mean, people get, I do view like sex as a sacred thing. Regardless of how you identify, I do view it as a sacred thing. And the idea that it's either sacred or it's completely casual, no emotions attached, I have a lot of problems with that. And I think, I'm actually writing a book about this, that a lot of the dynamics in purity culture, especially like in dating, it's the same in the secular world, where women are putting up with all these behaviors and it being normalized. Like ghosting. Yeah. It's one of the most like dehumanizing things. And there's so many things that my friends will tell me, and I'm like, but that's not okay. And they're like, Anna, you're new to this. You're new to this. You don't understand. He's talking to 4 girls. I'm like, that's not okay. And they're like, this is just how dating is. And I think I have a lens of it because I grew up the way that I did, that like I see how disposable women have become and men's like inability to commit. And so I do very much still feel very connected to viewing every human as sacred, and they deserve to be treated that way. And it's been really hard for me to accept that not everyone sees things that way and can treat people terribly, and that's all there is to it.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's something that I still really, really hold on to. And I mean, I still believe in Jesus, and that's complicated. Some days I don't, and some days I do.
What do you mean by that, by the way? That's an interesting thing that people say, and I'm always curious, like, what is it, like, that he existed? Why? What do you mean?
I mean that Jesus existed. I still. It depends on the day. I think at the end of the day, I do not look at the Bible as a literal. I look at it as a piece of literature, and I look at who Jesus was, and I look at his teachings, and whether things happened or they didn't, those teachings very much inform the way in which I live my life. And a lot of that is questioning religious institutions and putting my life in places that people of faith would question or look down on. I do think that my faith, in a way, gave me this lens of being able to love people. I mean, people always say, oh, religious people are close-minded, blah, 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 blah. But I have this drive to not be my younger self, that I try to understand the nuance of other people's opinions. And there are people that I deeply love that have theologies and politics that I do not understand, but I'm able to not dehumanize them because I understand the language behind it.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think that's really interesting, this idea about like the way that you figure that. And I'm the same way, right? I'm very public about my like doubts. I'm never 100% sure that God exists. And so we're getting close to holidays.
Okay.
Yeah. As a person, I assume that your family is still sort of in that world. And a lot of us are going to be going back to those kinds of families.
Yeah.
How do you navigate that? Like, how do you deal with that in a way that feels like you're not putting on a show for them? You're not making yourself small, but also you're staying connected.
Yeah, I think it takes a lot of things. I think for me, it was a very long period of grief of just having to accept I'm never going to be understood or seen in the ways that I want to by these people. And so when I go in those spaces, that's no longer my expectation. Mm-hmm. It's something that I would love to have, but it's just not going to happen. And so I think a lot of it has been grieving and having to forgive. And I think there's always that part of you that's like, I want them to approve of me. I want them to love me. And I've had to accept and like be okay with who I am and very firmly believe that and believe that there's nothing wrong with me for living the life that I do. And I think having people in your life that remind you of that you can like bounce ideas about, like, I had this interaction. Is it crazy that this just like, why am I having this reaction? And just like bouncing that off of people. I think, we still have those notions about family above everything. And I think learning space to take boundaries that they might not like, that there are certain things you're not willing to talk about, and you don't owe them an explanation. And so I think a lot of boundaries, and I don't know, I think for me, I'm going to be spending a lot of time with my friends, and that is a space where I feel really free. And I think that gives me like more excitement than, family is, it's just hard. And it's hard for me. It's like, I see under everything. Like I see all that is not talked about in every situation with everybody. And it can be really hard for me to focus on the joy with people when I can see these currents that we're not talking about.
Right. Yeah. And so like, when you are, I'd love to kind of pull back into your experience, not just into, sharing with us your experience, but really like looking back on the things that you've learned in a way that might help some other people. A lot of people that are in our community are somewhere in the midst of your story, right? Mm-hmm. Either they're where you are, they are a little bit further down the line. They're just starting to see everything come apart. For people that are in that place.
I think that's a really a good question. I think first of all, really pursuing having people in your life that you can be honest with about this stuff. And that I think I've had to learn a lot of humility in asking for help and being vulnerable and talking to people instead of just trying to figure it out all myself, because I did that for years, and that just got me into a deeper shame, guilt, fear spiral. I often would just play it out of like, what's the worst thing that could happen if I go down this thought trail? What is going to happen? And there's so many, if you are still holding on to faith, there are so many scriptural points at which people have doubt and they're not shamed for it. It's just, I think the thing for me is like having faith means believing and moving forward, even though you have every reason not to believe. And even when you have absolutely no evidence, it's that pushing forward and it's questioning. So I view questioning and all of that more as a sign of faith than not. And I think for sure, the idea of believing in things without questioning them, that's more indoctrination than it is actually believing in something. And so, I think that's the biggest, I had a guy come up after my reading crying. He's like, I want to believe in God, but I don't know how. And I was like, you're doing it. Like you're wondering, you're questioning, you're wrestling. And like, some days you're not going to believe in God. That's fine. It's not, I think we grew up where faith is this comfort. And I think the reality is that it's usually not a comfort. It's actually the opposite, especially for people that have had it weaponized against them.
Yeah. No, that's huge. So, I think that's incredibly helpful, especially when when you're in the thick of it, like giving yourself that kind of permission is really, really important. I feel like doubts and questions are a sign of spiritual health, right? Mm-hmm. It means that you're engaging seriously and doing the hard work of choosing beliefs, right? Figuring out what it is that you believe and what actually helps you become the best version of yourself and find a purpose greater than yourself. All right, so you've got this wonderful book, Devout, and obviously people can buy that everywhere. One of the things that Anna said is that connecting with community and finding safe people and spaces to share your doubts and questions are important. We actually have that as part of the Skeptic Pastor community. It's a Discord server that we call Not Church because one of the members said it's like church, right? Where there's people that are like talking about spiritual things, exploring all kinds of different spiritual practices. People are really there for each other. We have this area where we just hold space for difficult times and process all kinds of different things together. And there's nobody there telling you you're going to hell because you believe the wrong things. If you would like to be part of that, because I know that sometimes people live in a world where they actually they don't have access or ability or feel like they're safe to share those without losing all of their community. And so if you'd like a place like this, you can go to patreon.com/skepticpastor and that will give you, it's like $3 a month. And that'll give you access to that Discord server. We do it like that because we're not going to ever ask anybody to like give us some percentage of their income. You pay for what you get. And if it's working for you, then great. And if it stops working for you, you can just stop paying and no guilt. But if you show up in that space and you start just being hateful, we will bounce you and not feel bad about it. So,
I will tell you, I was a little story because I think you'll appreciate this. I was asked to talk to a group of pastors in Nashville this week. And my thing was like, I'm not going to look at their theology. Only to find out that several of them were Southern Baptists. And,
oh, man, that's hard.
One of them was like, what can I do? What can I do to make space for women in the church? And I think if I would have known his background, I would have been more reserved. But I was kind of just like, you just sit down and let them talk.
There you go.
He didn't know what to do with that. he didn't like that.
I'd love to ask you, and I did not prepare you for this. So you can say, Jeremy, this was too much. Is there a piece of this book that is particularly wonderful to you that you might like to read for us? As a way to close out.
Yeah, I'm gonna read. So the end of my book, it is a letter to my daughter, and I'm gonna just read part of it, just the end of it. Ezra, we live in a world that gives us plenty of reasons to be fearful and doubtful. I wish I could shield you from every last hardship, to take on any pain you'll ever feel as my own. The best I can do is to remind you of what I've come to know. That this world also gives us plenty of reasons to stop, pay attention, and let awe overwhelm us. That you will meet people over the course of your journey, teachers, friends, pastors, workout partners, who will help you remember who you are and be the presence of God for you, just as so many have been for me. Beyond that, there's not much that I can say for sure. I don't know. What I do know is tonight you climbed into bed and demanded me to read a bedtime story. As I read, you pointed to every page, mumbling words that I couldn't quite understand, at least not yet. And tomorrow, God willing, I will lay in the front lawn with you and watch as you run in circles, laughing with joyful abandon, full of trust.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful. And for just being so honest and telling us your story, Anna. We really appreciate it. You really should go get her book, Devout. It is brilliant. And I don't use that term lightly. It really is. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
And if you're liking the Unbelief podcast, we would really love it if you would give us a rating, a review, 4 stars, 5 stars, whatever is the best, and tell people what you like about this podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Amazon or wherever you're listening to it. All of those really do help. That's it. That's the podcast. Shout out to the Choir Network, to Patheos, to Matthew and Keith, who make everything happen. Now, get out of here. Go do something to make the world a better place. Okay? We'll see you next time.